Bob, it's great to be on this video call with you today. I know that you and I have wanted to share what we've been developing over the last number of years about the leadership power quadrant.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here and have the conversation. I think it's really important what we've stumbled upon, and it's important to talk about it and explain it as to how we got to this point and why is it so important.
Yeah, and just to give people a little bit of context, you and I met around 10 years ago,
hmm
and we've been collaborating together ever since then. And we really started having this conversation around the leadership power quadrant about 6, 7 months ago. Is that your
Yeah,
recollection too?
yeah, yeah. So it might be. We didn't call it the power quadrant. We
It's
really
true.
didn't know what it was. The conversation was probably a few years before that. I think it was actually 2019. I know it was pre-COVID. It's funny how we remember things now based on COVID. But we were meeting together and we was trying to solve or come up with a program with one of our other colleagues, and we kept asking the question, why are these certain things so important? What do they lead to? And we didn't even know what it was called, but I do believe you're correct. It was sometime this year we actually came across the power quadrant.
Yeah. So, Bob, why don't you share what are the quadrants that we've landed on?
Well, this is fantastic. It's emotional intelligence, which we both agree is the cornerstone for any type of leadership and team development. And then it's the ability to build and maintain trust, personal and within the organization.
Hmm.
Then there's the effective communications
Hmm.
and what all that entails. And then it's the accountability power quadrant, part of the power quadrant. So it's emotional intelligence, trust, accountability, and effective communications. And when we have all of those come together, the outcome, which is comes from you, was we have a psychologically safe environment or organization that's has a high degree of psychological safety where people can share their information candidly and openly and all of that. That's what we're all striving for.
Yeah, I know that you and I grappled a lot with coming up with this power quadrant, this idea of these four areas. I mean, we talked about these four areas a lot, and then other areas got into it, and all of a sudden we had many more aspects. So it was no longer a quadrant.
Yeah.
And then through a lot of time and just going back and forth, we realized that everything else, things like accountability, not accountability, sorry, everything else like conflict resolution and giving, receiving feedback, leading a team, all those things really did fall into these four areas.
Mhm.
And I know most people understand emotional intelligence, effective communication, and trust. But even I was grappling with a little bit about the accountability side. And this
Mhm.
is an area that you've really been honing in on a
Mhm.
lot. And I think, like myself, when I first looked at accountability, I always saw it as do what you say you're going to do by when.
Mhm.
But in reality, accountability is a lot deeper and richer than just that.
Mhm. Oh, I agree, and I did that because of my own personal work experience. What is this accountability, and how does it affect everything we do? And it really is. If we don't have the personal accountability, none of this other matters. But all of these, if you can't put a scale on it, as far as one's valued more than the other, although we both agree that emotional intelligence it probably does tip the scale because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. As we see it on the personal accountability is overcoming one's personal circumstances to achieve the desired result. And then we could also build on that to become organizationally with the teams. And what all does it take for a team leader or to be a team member to support one another? And then now it starts to get into okay, now we can see how candid feedback, giving and receiving feedback, emotional intelligence, the ability to build and maintain that trust.
I'll share a story. You might remember this story of this one person who's an executive director, and he was giving a presentation to a group of people. Well, it was, 25, 30 people. It wasn't that big, and somebody on his team who reports to him pointed out in the middle of the presentation that he misspelled a word twice in his slide.
Mhm.
And I asked him, "What did you do?" And he said, "What I wanted to do and what I actually did were two very different things. What I wanted to do would have been me before doing the emotional intelligence work. which would have been to say something to demean this person, to put this person in their place.
Hmm.
And what I did instead was that I acknowledged this person for helping me be better and helping me to improve by pointing out that there were some errors in my presentation. And I asked him, "What did you create with that?" And he said, "I created psychological safety and trust."
Hmm.
And if I hadn't had done that, if I, and this is his words, if I was the 1.0 version of me,
One
um,
point.
that's
I
what he
like
said,
that. I like that.
1.0
Yeah.
version, I would have destroyed trust.
Hmm.
So in a sense, now that I think about it, and I didn't really think about this before, the team member that pointed it out was actually being accountable, right? Because there's the part in the Oz principle. I may get this wrong. The see it. What are those three steps again, Bob?
Oh, see it, own it, solve it, and do it.
Yeah.
See
So
it, own it, solve it, do it. Yeah.
yeah. So in a sense, she did part one and two, and he did part three and four. In that,
Yeah.
he completed it. It was almost a
Yeah.
handoff.
Hmm.
So we still revisit emotional intelligence, and in fact, it
Hmm.
really is woven into everything that we're doing now.
Yeah.
That foundation is always there.
Because we both agree how important emotional intelligence is. But with some of your other clients, have you found it difficult when they don't revisit psychological safety, or I'm sorry, emotional intelligence, and they just
Yeah.
like a one and done, and then 6 months later you're in to do something else? Is that a problem for the
Well, yeah,
organization?
you and I, we talked about this a lot, right? The one and done versus extended training over
Hmm.
time. I'll share an example from two different hospitals.
Hmm.
One, I visited them there was a gap of about 3 months, three
Hmm.
months between visits. And the first one, we did emotional intelligence, then we came back and we're doing communication. And when we started off, I asked the group who remembers what a key moment is. And half the room
Right.
raised their hand, right? And then, so who remembers what happens when we have a key moment? And almost nobody raised their hand. So I
Hmm.
decided in that moment to do a quick refresher on
Hmm.
emotional intelligence, because how could we move on to communication, have an effective conversation with
Hmm.
somebody if we're getting triggered? Because, right, a key moment is a triggering event. Something
Right.
happens, somebody says something, an event occurs that's upsetting to us, and that we
Hmm.
call that a key moment. And how could you be involved in effective communication without being able to be present in that conversation? And that's really what emotional intelligence gives you. One of the things that EI gives you is the ability to be present in
Hmm.
conversations and really hear the other person and make sure you heard them
Hmm.
properly. So that was one example. And then there's another hospital that really embraced emotional intelligence. And I did a series of workshops, and then we are going to do another set of series of workshops on emotional intelligence. And the CEO called me up and she said, "Look, I'm totally willing to bring you on earlier. I think we should do an EI review."
Oh,
And we
nice.
did. We did a whole half day program just on
Hmm.
emotional intelligence before we went into the other work. And this hospital really embraced it. Like, they were already using key moments, became part of
Hmm.
their language. There was stickiness to it, but they still forgot a lot. And afterwards, the CEO said, "I'm so thrilled that we did this,
Hmm.
because even though I remembered a lot of it, going through it a second time really reinforced a lot of the concepts of it." So it was definitely a winning. It was a great situation.
Yeah, that's important. And you mentioned something there that we've talked a bit about, and it helps with the organization. You mentioned stickiness and what makes it sticky. So for those that are going to listen to us, that's the ability to for the organization to continue to use this. After we come in, we do a training with them and do an exercise and development with them, that they start to use this and they embrace it. It becomes artifacts within their company. It could be
Mhm.
anything from a poster on the wall that, about above the line, below the line behaviors. It could be the concept of the key moment. It could be something on their desktop that they can look at the power quadrant and see at a reference and say, oh, okay, I can see just by looking at this that I could have done better if I would have exercised greater EI skills.
Mhm.
And that's really what this was all about, because it was after you had that meeting with them and you realized I can't go into teams without first doing emotional intelligence. And I
Right.
think that's when the light bulb clicked for all of us, for you and I, that, okay, we knew that these four things were so important, but that was the importance of emotional intelligence being the
Right.
cornerstone of it. And because none of this, you can't be, accountability is affected, your ability to effectively communicate, the ability to build and maintain trust. Nobody trusts a hothead. And nobody
Right.
trusts somebody that will not listen to them, because that's what people want. People want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to be valued. They want to know they bring value to the organization. And that's how we promote engagement, employee engagement. So when all these companies are looking for all these different programs, employee engagement, high performing teams, it could be any number of books that you pull off the shelf that you see, people are all looking for these programs. But what we found in doing all this, the research, these four things is the common thread in all of it. And that's why we call it the Power Quadrant.
So the four quadrants that we've been working with is number one, emotional intelligence, and we're also calling it self mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And the primary intention behind that, there's a lot there, but the primary intention is that leaders and teams learn how to recognize their emotions and the impact of their emotions and how to really transform a key moment, which is an upsetting event that occurs usually when under pressure,
Mm-hmm.
into getting moving past that so that you can be present or what we would call moving towards self mastery versus survival.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move into effective communication, where we bring in what's been learned through emotional intelligence and we move it into our communication models and learn how to really be present in our conversations. So those are the first two. I'm going to toss it over to you
Mm-hmm.
for the second two,
Yeah.
trust and accountability.
Yeah, the importance about that is, one, emotional intelligence is so important, especially in effective communications, because of everything you just said. How many different ways do we communicate with others? And it goes well beyond the spoken word, but it's about listening, it's about our demeanor, it's about our dress, it's about the way we maintain our offices and all of those things. And most importantly is how do we communicate that others, we value the other person. And when you have a high degree of emotional intelligence, that's really the tipping point for effective communications. And then we take that into the ability to build and maintain trust. When we look at the trust model and the seeing others as allies, first being trustworthy, do we do the things we say we're going to do? Do we hold ourselves to a certain set of values that are innate within us? And when we come into the workplace, do we hold ourselves accountable? So there's the accountability word, right? So you see where accountability plays into trust. And we hold ourselves accountable to bring that every day. And how do we treat each other on the teams? Are we acting as looking for win situations, or is it always a win-lose situation? And then finally is the accountability component of it. And there's two different types of accountability. There's organizational accountability, which most people default to this definition, that is being held responsible for the outcomes that you've given. Now, that is organizational accountability. And a lot of times when people look at that as punitive. And there's also a positive side to that, is when somebody does perform well, that we give them that positive feedback, and it goes back into the EI loop. But then the definition for the accountability is personal accountability, to overcome one's personal circumstances, to be able to seek out and achieve the desired outcome that they have.
Absolutely. And just to go back to trust for a moment, because a lot of the work that we do is also on interpersonal trust and building trust through conversations, how we communicate with each other. It's
Hmm.
all about that interpersonal trust. And it
Yeah.
reminds me of a prospect that I chose not to engage
Hmm.
who had an issue with her company and her turnover rate was 60%. And so I immediately went to Glassdoor and what I read about the owner's behavior was just shocking. And now I understood why they had such high turnover. The CEO, you never knew which version of the CEO was going to walk in the door or out of her office any given time. One time, sweet and kind, next minute, crazy, yelling, screaming. And I've worked for people like that in the past, and there is no trust.
Hmm.
There's absolutely zero trust. So it is behavioral, as well. And trust is connected back to emotional intelligence.
So the goal is genuine culture change, genuine leadership change, and it's everlasting. That's another part of stickiness.
Yeah. I'm going to wrap up by sharing that situation where I did work with a tech company, and then the CEO sent me a screen capture of their Slack channel, and somebody took my picture and turned it into an emoji. And that was the emoji that they would use when they were having a key moment, right? That was everybody agreed that Robert's picture is going to be our key moment emoji. So it was funny, but you're right. We want it to really infiltrate, to percolate through the organization. And I know that one of the successes that I point to is when I go back to a company and I hear other people who have not gone through my training saying something like, "Ooh, I just had a key moment the other day." Right?
Nice.
Then we know
Yeah.
that the learning, the development is percolating through the whole
Hmm.
organization. So,
Yeah.
Bob, final thought?
I can't wait for the next one. This was
Good.
a lot of fun. I enjoy this stuff, and the goal is to make it better.
Yep, me too. And I'm just going to speak to people who watch this on various platforms. If you have a question that you would like us to address in one of these talks, please put it in the comments, and we will look at those. And we will, and you let us know if we can use your name or not. And if it fits within the area that we're addressing, we'll be happy to answer your questions. So, Bob, thank you very much. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it.
Yep, look
Bye.
forward to future times.
Yep.